she was running late.
Members are on the floor. As we gather once again to speak out in favor of honoring our responsibility to protect and defend the American people, once again we are fighting an uphill fight to have legislation brought to the floor that would do just that. Right now, as we gather on the steps of the Capitol, there are many on the floor from the House and Senate, sadly to say, just on the Democratic side, although I know our support for this legislation is bipartisan. Legislation to no fly, no buy. If you're on the terrorist list, you can't buy a gun. And for sensible background checks. That's the dual agenda that we have today in our country. Since our members are gathered on the floor of the House in protest that we cannot even have a vote, because we truly believe that if there were a vote, that we would win the vote. Because 85 to 90% of the American people, depending on the bill, support responsible background checks legislation, which is bipartisan, and the no-fly, no-buy legislation, which is bipartisan. I earlier mentioned that we would be joined by Congressman.
Now, the interesting thing about this is that that young man was not eligible to own a gun. In fact, the background check had been undertaken. But as the leader said, we want reasonable, effective background checks. We have a big loophole in this law that, because of this incident, is now called the Charleston loophole. And that loophole is simply this: if within the 3-day period the background check is not completed, the gun sale can be consummated.
All right. We're here on behalf of the more than 150,000 activists that have already called Congress to make their voice heard on this issue, and the millions more from a growing coalition of organizations plastering social media with our outrage, holding elected leaders accountable to put our interests ahead of the interests of the corporate gun lobby, to, as we've been saying, disarm hate. And I am here on behalf of all of them to say, hell no.
No break.
Congresswoman Elizabeth Estes of Connecticut.
Gunned down in their classroom by someone who never should have had access to a gun. And folks, in the 3.5 years that I've had the honor to serve in this institution, we have been denied the opportunity to have a single vote, not one vote, not once, to help stop the carnage. 100,000 Americans have died since Sandy Hook from gunshot wounds.